Hey guys, all right, so this is going to be chapter 27, video 2B. I remember, breaking this section up into two videos. And in this one, we're going to be talking about nationalism in the Middle East. So nationalist movements brought immense changes to the Middle East after World War I. And we're going to look at several areas, starting first with Turkey. Now, Turkey became a country following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. You look at the map in 1914, here's Turkey here. What today is Turkey. That was still the seat of the Ottoman Empire, and then you had areas here that would eventually be Syria, Jordan, Iraq, today Israel, even sections along here of Saudi Arabia. And then you see by the 1920s how all of these countries, well, definitely by the 1930s and 40s, all of these areas had become independent. But after World War I, the Ottoman Empire falls apart. And in 1923, the Republic of Turkey is founded, right? So it shows it right here, 1923. Now, the forces that led to the overthrow of the last Ottoman Sultan was they were led by this guy, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Now, Ataturk, for whatever reason, is somebody that the Regents loves to ask about. So he definitely is an important one to remember. And it's important to remember what he did. He was known as the father of the Turks, and he set out on an ambitious policy to modernize and westernize, right? That's what you have to remember about Ataturk. Modernization and westernization. He encouraged industrialization to expand. He encouraged the economy to expand. He encouraged also a changing of Turkish customs. You see what you see his dress. Okay, he's dressed in a much more Western three-piece suit. He's not wearing your traditional fez, those little hats that the Turks would wear. He's not dressed in traditional Islamic robes. He's encouraging a changing of the Turkish alphabet to a more westernized one as well. It's very similar to what we talked about with Japan with the Meiji Restoration. Okay, and he also encouraged, let me get me out of here. There you go. He encouraged the secularization of schools. Remember, secularization means non-religious, moving away from the Islamic laws, okay, de-emphasizing Islamic laws and customs and putting in a more secular approach. Now, similar reforms like this were taking place in Persia. Now, inspired by Ataturk's reforms, nationalists in Persia, they were seeking to modernize the economy, and they really resented the European influence. Now, in order to strengthen this and, really this whole process, this was done under the leadership of this guy, Reza Khan. Now, Reza Khan was a military officer who overthrew the previous Shah of Iran. All right, now, again, let me just point this out. Persia and Iran are really the same thing. Okay, under Khan's leadership, Persia, he now encourages the world to start using the term Iran. But, we're talking about the same place. So, it's really not that big of a deal to use them interchangeably. All right, in any event, so he overthrows the previous Shah, the previous king of Iran, and then makes himself the new one. Now, like Ataturk, he moved forward with a policy of modernization. He forced Persians to wear Western clothes. He made changes to the laws, doing away with a lot of the old Islamic laws. He also wanted modernization in industry. Here you see him overseeing the construction of railroads and so forth. There you see a picture of him and Ataturk. Okay, that's Khan here on the left, and that's Ataturk here on the right. So they were both very, very similar in their goals. So if there's one thing you got to remember about these two guys, it's modernization and westernization. Now, the last part, especially of the westernization, really put him at odds with conservative Muslims. And that was a conflict that would lead to drastic changes in the country several decades later, but we'll talk about that in a later chapter. All right, now let's talk about Arab nationalism. So Arab nationalism was spreading in other parts of the Middle East. Now, the relationship between the Middle East and the rest of the world changed significantly in the early 20th century. And that was because the Middle East had a large supply of material that the whole industrialized world wanted. And we're talking about oil. Now, oil was not a hot commodity in the 17 and early 1800s, but by the 1900s, it was possibly the most valuable material on Earth. Gasoline-powered engines were becoming standard, and everybody needed oil. So now everybody wanted a piece of the Middle East. We're talking about the industrialized world. We're talking about the United States. We're talking about Europe. We're talking about China and Japan and so forth. So partly in response to the increase increase in foreign influence, Arab nationalism grew, and this led to a movement known as Pan-Arabism. Now, this was similar to Pan-Africanism that we discussed in the previous section, and it called for unity among Arab peoples to protect them from being exploited by foreigners. And at this point, it's important to remind you that Arab is just one of several ethnicities in the Middle East. The Turks and the Persians we just discussed, they are not Arabs. You don't just have one ethnicity in the Middle East. It's also important not to mistake Arab for Muslim. Muslim is a practitioner of Islam, of your religion. Arab is an ethnicity that you were born into. Now, let me also just show you a map of, these are all countries that either have a majority or sizable Arab population. Now you look at, there's most of North Africa does, Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, and so forth, but it's really this area in the Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, this is Saudi Arabia, the biggest one there. And then you've got Iraq, Jordan, and Syria. This is Iran. This is Turkey up here. Okay, so these are not Arab countries. These green ones are your Arab countries. So Pan-Arabism, right, it emphasized this common history and culture among Arab peoples. And a big cause of the Pan-Arab movement was the feeling among Arabs that they were betrayed at the peace conference. Right, Arabs showed up in Paris at the peace conference after World War II, and they felt that they were owed something because they helped the British fight against the Ottomans. The British military had promised them a larger say in their destiny afterwards. Remember that whole thing of self-determination. But we also remember what happened at the Paris Peace Conference, that none of these areas were given full independence. Instead, they were turned into mandates. So this is what the Middle East looked like, or at least the Arab countries looked like after World War I. Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine, they all became British mandates, and Syria and Lebanon became French mandates. Now, one mandate in particular that I want to talk about, because this would be the center of a conflict that would last to this day, and that is Palestine. So Palestine was the area that today is mostly Israel, right? So here's this British mandate of Palestine. Really, we're talking about this region in here. And as I said, today, this is the majority of this region is the nation of Israel today. And Israel was the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. But over the centuries, most of them have been scattered from Palestine. And since the Middle Ages, the area was controlled by Muslim empires, and therefore had been populated by mostly Muslim people. But in the late 1800s, the Zionism movement really took hold. Now, remember back in a previous chapter, we talked about the beginnings of Zionism and how it was a movement to build a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Now, the movement was slowly picking up steam in the early 1900s, and Jewish communities were increasing in the area. Now, Jews and Muslim Palestinians living next to each other really wasn't a big problem at first, but Great Britain pretty much screwed things up with the thing called the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was named for a foreign minister to the region called James Balfour, and it made promises to both Jews and Muslims. It supported the idea of a Jewish state. Let me just move me down here. So here you're seeing the article, okay, Palestine for the Jews, official sympathy. So it kind of made a promise to the Jews that, yeah, we'll create a Jewish state for you, but it also promised land to Arabs. It specifically said that nothing shall be done to displace any existing non-Jewish communities. That means the Arab, Muslim, Palestinians. So Arabs understandably interpreted this as Britain telling them that they will get the land when the British leave. It really was setting it up for some serious, serious problems. And these problems first started to rise when Jewish populations increased in the area. You look at the chart here. All right. Now, one thing you notice is that overall population increased significantly starting in the early 1900s. All right. But you also look at the Jewish population. Okay. This is the Jewish population. This is your overall non-Jewish population. So as the Jewish population just skyrockets from non-existent in the 1850s to now, over 600,000 by 1950, it's going to create some tension between the two groups. Okay, so anti-Semitism also was increasing in Europe during this time. The Zionist movement continued to build momentum. And eventually, as I just said, the tension between the two groups, it's going to build. And this building conflict would only get worse after World War II, and unfortunately and tragically continues to this day. All right, so that wraps things up for this section. And in the next section, we're going to talk about the independence movement in India.